Hi, everyone. I am Shuly Galili. I'm founding partner at UpWest. This is our third session with Google for Startups. I'm really excited about today's session where we're going to cover the CIO view in terms of how startups should engage in times of COVID. A lot of things have shifted in the market, and I think it's going to be fascinating to hear our guests today, and I can't wait to introduce our guests. But beforehand, I want to thank Google for Startups for co-hosting this with us. This is our third session together. And to talk about Google for Startups and the fabulous work they do, I'm introducing Inbal Perlman, who is heading Google Campus Tel Aviv's community. And Inbal, hi from Tel Aviv.
Hi, Shuly. It's very hot here today, so I'm a little jealous of your weather, I just have to say. I think all people in Israel right now are melting together. Before we start and get a refreshment from the crazy weather, I'd just like to introduce campus. And first of all, thank you, Shuly and the entire UpWest team. We're really excited for today's webinar and this entire partnership. We already had 2 amazing sessions. I personally really looked forward for today. So a little bit about campus. We are a physical space to help startups grow with the best of Google. And with COVID, we've moved all of our activity online, and we offer events like this, mentoring sessions, Google Connection. So if you're not familiar, you're welcome to check out our website and learn some more. And for today, I really want to say this is truly an exciting event because we've had so many conversations with founders specifically about working with corporations during COVID, post-COVID, and I couldn't think of a better speaker to tackle all these questions. So thank you, Alan. And if you are interested to also see the recordings of the past events that we had, you can check out our social and see how you can become a member. So thank you again. And I'm going to pass the mic back to you, and everyone enjoy and keep cool if you're in Israel. Stay cool.
Thank you, Inbal, and thank you, Google for Startups. This is really a really great partnership, and we found that creating content together and delivering it to startups who are part of our ecosystem has been really beneficial, especially in times like this where all of us kind of confined to our own space. So when COVID started, I immediately thought of one person that I wanted to hear from, and that was Alan Boehme from P&G, because of the kind of perspective he has on so many different technologies and seeing things from kind of a big corporate point of view. But before I introduce Alan, who is really incredible, I want to introduce I decided to kind of switch it around a little bit and add a founder to the conversation, because I think that would help us a lot to kind of dig in kind of more critical questions that a lot of founders currently have. And here from Palo Alto, I'm introducing Rob Gurzeev, who is the CEO and co-founder of CyCognito. He's currently building a really fast-growing cybersecurity company in the attack surface management space and category. He raised close to $50 million and serving Fortune 500 customers. We've had a lot of conversations, Rob and I, about various verticals and various implications of what COVID-19 had on both founders as well as the market. And I'm really excited that he's here with me to ask Alan some really important questions, so everyone will benefit from the perspective. So introducing Alan Boehme. He's an experienced global CIO, CTO, VP of IT innovation for Global 2000 organizations. Currently, he's at Procter Gamble. Where he's serving as a chief IT innovation officer, and previously was global CTO as well. And for those of you who are not familiar, P&G is the leading multinational consumer goods company. I think the number one thing on my mind was to ask you about toilet paper, Alan, because I'm sure everybody was thinking, you know, what's happening with that? But seeing that P&G really has such incredible breadth of consumer goods and brands that all of us are consuming every day. And I think, you know, many of you are familiar with Gillette and other types of consumer goods. Alan, I wanted to start with you and just kind of ask you to describe, you know, in kind of the breadth and scope in P&G for those who are not familiar, and what should startup know about the organization and its various functions. So kind of understanding what encompasses your world as a CIO, as a global CTO.
Certainly. Well, first, thank you for inviting me. I really appreciate it, Shuly. I've known you for 6-7 years, and it's always, I've seen what UpWest has done, and I remember visiting campus Tel Aviv for the first time about 6-7 years ago as well, and really appreciate Google sponsoring this as well. What I thought I would do is maybe answer this question a little bit differently, in that because this applies to many large corporations, and maybe this will help everybody understand, is that P&G, similar to when I was at Coca-Cola, similar to when I was with GE and others, when you look at a company, when it gets to the size of P&G as a multinational, you can't really look at it as a company. It's not a single company. There are multiple functions, multiple divisions, and multiple decision makers across everything. P&G is set up in 6 different business units. In addition, it's set up in a number of different functions, from supply chain to R&D to others. Each one of these divisions works in a fairly autonomous, I mean, semi-autonomous, but fairly autonomous way when it comes to looking at many of their needs for technology and for business services. So to think of a large corporation and think I'm going to do business with an entire large corporation, there's very few companies that do this. And even the large tech companies that service these corporations, they are also broken down into individuals in individual areas that are providing different services to each one of these things. So first thing is, remember, when you're dealing with a large company, you're dealing with many, many large companies within a large company. And so there's always going to be different areas that are doing well and different areas that are not doing as well, meaning where the investments are being made at any given point in time. At P&G, with the COVID pandemic, we actually have been, from a financial standpoint, business standpoint, as you can see in the numbers that we reported recently, we're doing quite well. And as you mentioned, there's been a run on a number of our products, from toilet paper to paper towels to diapers and other things, which is you know, not necessarily, you know, it's not normal. And in fact, the supply chain was never broken, and people were hoarding things, and that was really the cause for the shortages. It's not as if we're not producing the same rate. It's not as if as a country we're not consuming at the same rate in the United States and elsewhere. But people have been hoarding certain materials, certain goods, and that's a behavioral thing, much more so than anything ongoing. In fact, the factories have ramped up and are producing a greater volume than ever before. Even in considering, some of our factories have been converted to producing PPEs and other things to help the various countries around the world and the communities we serve in. So first lesson for tech entrepreneurs is look at where you are selling to and who you're selling to. Security is a fairly global aspect at most companies. It still is a need with many corporations, and the pandemic has pointed that out, that when you are no longer working at an office, but you're living where you work, is how I like to phrase it. The endpoints change and everything, so there are needs there. Collaboration and things of this nature are a must, because you no longer can just walk in and stop by somebody's office. Interesting enough, as I talk to my friends, we've seen a 10 to 20% increase in productivity in almost every company with people working at home, which is interesting, whether it's because you have nothing else to do but work, or you've been able to cut your commute out and give a couple hours a day back. I don't know, but we're seeing that. Other areas,
I want to, before we go into different areas, Alan, because I think that will be, super helpful for a lot of startups. I can't help but ask you, you've obviously a lot of global CIOs and IT leaders, projected certain priorities for the organization, early in the year, and then COVID hits, and I can't help but thinking about like what goes on in your head during times like this in terms of your priorities. I mean, if before your priorities was, AI, ML, marketing technology, supply chain, IoT, cybersecurity, have these priorities shifted because of this, or, budgets obviously shifted? And what can you tell us about what typically happens to a lot of your friends who are in the same role in all these corporations?
Sure. So having lived through a number of financial crises before, you can just go back to history and look. When this hit, it was for most corporations, it was the start of their fiscal year.
Yeah.
When I talk to people, and especially, and it really gets down to industries. Some industries have just been decimated, whether it's travel, hospitality, restaurants, anything that was being spent there is being clawed back because it's really survival mode, and that's gonna be that way for quite some time. When you get into manufacturing, there's been money it's been diverted in order to take care of connectivity and take care of these other things. And now as we're seeing companies report decreases in earnings, it typically means you go back into the budget. The numbers I've been hearing from my friends and colleagues in what I will call a typical industry is 20 to 30% reductions in budget. And that's discretionary budget. You're also seeing a lot of activities where companies are coming out. There's companies that have started in recent years to better manage your licensing spend for SaaS applications or IaaS applications or PaaS applications. And you're seeing them becoming much more aggressive to try to take advantage of a reduction in licenses that are needed to support sales teams, because every salesperson is all of a sudden become an inside salesperson. And that the way you deal as an inside salesperson and work as somebody in the field is completely different. So I think that we're looking at this 20 to 30%. I think there's a refocus, although security and collaboration and things are up. Many of the, what I will call nice to have projects on the application side are being diverted or being slowed down. Things that have an immediate payback within this fiscal year are getting prioritized. If you can walk in and show somebody how they will actually make the investment back by the end of December, assuming they're on a calendar year, those are moving forward.
Can you give an example of like, what's the nice to have that you think will get off the shelf? And what are the things that, will, make our fiscal, look better? Is this something that we're going after?
Well, I think it's all across the board. So some of the things that could make fiscal look better is if you have a voice transformation, if you can get a voice service into the cloud very quickly and cut your costs of your old PBXs or something, that has an immediate payback. Things that can get you that can help you move into the cloud, your workloads from your data, from fixed data centers, if you can get to a variable cost structure, again, that's something that will have an immediate payback. The nice to haves tend to be more on the application side. In an era when you don't know what it's going to take to grow the top line in most companies, again, P&G is different because we're just moving so fast because of our products. But in some of these industries, there's definitely a slowdown in the marketing spend because consumer behaviors and customer behaviors are different now and will be different coming out of this. So how do you market to people in the future? So things that are involved with marketing dollars will be questionable. Some programs that might have to do with, it could be HR type of activities, which we can get by with the HR system for another year, or maybe it's not an entire system. It might be some type of a specific application in that place where you can get by for a little while longer. Those things are being slowed down a bit. And money is going into those things that provide the security because of the increased threats that we're seeing And those things, as I said, that give you that immediate payback.
Got it. So, so we talked about the different technology. Do you think, I'm just looking at what we've seen with our supply chain, do you see that more attention will be given to technologies that can improve that for a lot of companies like P&G? Do you see that, how would you improve your insights into consumer behavior in times like this, right? I mean, we talked about it, at the fact that it's really hard because how do you test it in times that everybody's, working from home?
Yeah, no, those are two real good questions. I'll take the second one first.
Okay.
For longest periods of time, every industry has used gotten in-person consumer customer feedback, whether it's focus groups, consumer panels, whether it's demos, whether it's at trade shows. There was a lot of interaction in order to get, hey, what do you think of this? Let me show you what we have, and that. Well, those days of that close personal interaction appear to be something of the past. And now the question is, how can you actually do this virtually? Is there going to be, are Zoom panels actually going to be effective? Because when you're doing research, you're looking for people's body language, you're looking at their eyes, you're looking at everything to see how people react, sense of smell, taste, if you're in the food industry. You lose a little bit of something when you're dealing with virtually. So I think we're going to have to rethink how this information is collected when you can't literally reach out and touch people. And that creates that. On the supply chain is actually interesting, is that because of all of the growth in, I'm going to call it home delivery services or last mile delivery, that's changed. That should change how supply chains are operated. When I say should, means that large investments have been made in the past based on the assumption that there's going to be there's centralized warehousing and distribution, with a lot of the product ending up in very large stores, and people were willing to travel to these stores to pick up their goods. That's been the model for years. And you start thinking about shelf displays, you start thinking about all of these things. In the new model, as I've been talking to people, there seems to be more and more of a hesitancy in leaving your protected area, whether your protected area is your home, whether your protected area is a neighborhood, but there's a less of a willingness to put yourself out into the wild, if you may, which means that in the future, the way people purchase, the way people acquire their goods and services might change. It may mean that we'll see more direct to consumer, but many of the direct to consumer wars have been fought and won already, with a couple big players that are dominating that space. Maybe we will see more micro distribution, and people will start doing more smaller stores closer to the neighborhood as opposed to going to larger stores. But we're also seeing some of these larger, and we're seeing some places, in the United States, it's interesting, is that restaurants are now selling toilet paper and paper towels in addition to food to take out. They're selling milk, they're selling other bulk products. They're adapting. We're seeing the same thing in some of the large big box stores that were only delivering to businesses are now delivering to homes. And the prices actually are quite competitive and compelling, especially if you live a distance away, of not going there and just having them do it. And that's going to put them in competition with people.
So
yeah, go ahead.
A quick question that may be very interesting for many people connected to this is, with so many opportunities and challenges, especially now in this COVID-19 situation, how do you decide what domains you want to focus on, and how do you want to invest in, internally in internal R&D versus cooperation and collaboration with startups as an innovation department?
Our department hasn't changed much. We have a very large R&D organization that continues to look at new products and services, tends to be a little bit further out. The innovation department tends to work on things that are closer in. Those are known business opportunities and problems. We haven't changed much. We're still actively soliciting and putting out for information how to solve these problems. I think the priority shifts a little bit as to which problem you're going to solve or you're going to go after, because we were, you know, just a few weeks ago, we were worried about how do we bring people back to work safely, and you know, how are we going to track them? How are we going to provide services? That wasn't on the radar 3 months ago, but all of a sudden that becomes a priority, and something else has to be deprioritized for a period of time. But I don't believe any of that's changed in our industry. When I talk to my friends in the airline and travel industry, it's changed. They're looking at cleaning products. They're looking at other things just to survive. And it's what can we do to survive at a reasonable cost, because we can't restart our business. The only common thread across all industries is the uptake in security risk that we've seen. The number of incidents have increased dramatically across all the industries. And that seems to be the one, I hate to say it, the one area that seems to be immune right now.
Can you elaborate a little bit more about that particular opportunity? I assume, you know, we're talking to Google Israel, so I assume some founders there are thinking about, you know, the security space. Some of them maybe are already building something in security, and I'm sure Rob can add some insights on that.
Well, and I think as we said a little bit earlier, the perimeter has changed again. I mean, the idea of having a fixed perimeter has been dead for a long time, but when it starts at the level that it's starting in your home or where your residence is, as opposed to your place of business, that changes the entire footprint. From a networking perspective, this is really showing the need for more for segmentation, which was really just starting to get there. It's showing the need for zero trust networks, which we're just starting to come into play. So these things that were sort of nascent and the early adopters were there, is now going to become mainstream faster. And the bad actors, if you may, are aware of these shifts and are taking advantage of these shifts across the board, from everything that I'm reading in public press, as well as things that are being shared. I'm one of the founders of the Cloud Security Alliance, founding board director member, and you can see things are already happening.
Yeah, that's something that with CyCognito are also seeing all across the board, especially at Global 1000 companies, and especially in that now all of these VPNs and other gateways get exposed, and you have to let people work and connect to these internal applications and networks from home. All of these changes and configuration changes significantly expand companies' attack surfaces.
And then I think you get to network, also get to the network impact. What I've learned is that between 5 and 6 p.m., don't schedule Zoom calls, because now you're competing with Netflix, you're competing with the bandwidth in your home with Netflix, you're competing with the games and everything else. It's changing everything.
Yeah.
Alan, what other areas, you know, have you seen that will, you know, have an uptick in terms of adoption of new technologies, or where you think there's going to be openness right now to try new things from, you know, innovators outside?
Well, I think we mentioned briefly networks. I mean, the network changes are going to be required by every corporation. So I think that networking technology is going to just really heat up coming out of this thing. I think what we're also seeing is a doubling down on AI and ML, that we need to have better predictions. We can no longer do a lot of these time series analyses and assuming that the new normal is, or the next normal is going to be consistent with seasonality from last year, the last 5 years, or other things. So we're going to need new techniques to assist in forecasting of everything from raw materials to finished goods to routing of vehicles to everything. All of that's going to change. It used to take an hour and a half sometimes to get from San Francisco to San Jose. I'm sure you've experienced that. You can make it in 30 minutes now.
Right.
You know, and so what's gonna come next? Is the new normal going to be a 45-minute commute? We've also seen an outflow. I've seen a lot of data on an outflow of people from major urban areas, New York and Los Angeles, relocating already to other areas that are more rural in the United States. And that's going to change the consumption of goods and create new technology. So AI and ML based activities programs are going to be hugely important. And if you can show the benefits from this very quickly, you will have companies adopting these in a number of different areas in the corporations.
We talked a little bit about data analytics in terms of, areas in the enterprise right now that could benefit CIOs in analyzing better. Can you talk a little bit about that as well?
Well, I think for a number of years, and many CIOs and many companies have been flying blind a little bit. I mean, you've had tools that have been looking at getting better understanding of costs associated with running IT. A lot of those tools were developed during the era of sort of physical infrastructure as opposed to virtual infrastructure or infrastructure that you're renting. The same thing is going to apply to visibility for the cost of things that are being roboticized. Those things are going to have to occur. We're now seeing robotics as a service pop up. So everyone is trying to get to variable cost as fast as they can. There are not a lot of tools that are easy to implement. And that's what I'll stress, the ease of implementation. There are not a lot of tools there that really can provide you that transparency. So I think there's a huge opportunity in the area of analytics for IT and how IT can use analytics to improve itself and therefore improve the business as well.
And speaking of ease of use in a broader term, maybe, when you connect with startups on the BI and similar domains, or in general, what helps you prioritize and decide who you're going to try and go to a POC with? What makes it more attractive versus less in terms of ease of deployment, ease of working with, and so forth?
So I think at least where we are, I think I'm going to say the platform wars have been won, but there's when I think of a platform, I think of something for general use. And the reality is most organizations have settled in on what platforms are going to have for generalized use. Where the opportunity are those things that are for special uses, or those things that are meeting specific business needs identified today that are very specialized in a given subject matter domain. And so those are the areas where I believe there's still huge opportunity, whether it is media optimization, whether it is last mile optimization, whether it's predicting behaviors, consumer behaviors within a micro segmented area of a neighborhood or something. That's where there's an awful lot of opportunity. But to simply have another platform or another cloud service that can be used to do things across the entire enterprise, I think most major corporations have that. There may be something for mid-market, and we shouldn't forget about mid-market. I think many times startups tend to go after the global 1,000. The reality is the amount of time it takes to close a deal at a global 1,000 is a multiple of X plus versus a mid-market size company. And if you want to grow your business, if you want to preserve your equity, sometimes it's better to go get 2 or 3 smaller deals and get them implemented in a shorter period of time than it is to go try to close one large deal. So Platforms for mid-market is probably a really, really good place to be. Specialized technology, specialized solutions for the global 1000, global 2000 is probably a better bet right now.
Yeah, it's probably got less, you know, attention to as well to, you know, talk externally to people. Rob, do you have more questions?
Sorry for that, I was on mute. So speaking of innovation, one interesting conversation that I heard recently is the whole conversation about the legitimacy of stock buybacks in companies that are not innovating and are not investing in R&D. So it would be interesting to hear your thoughts as a leader in obviously a huge enterprise. How do you see that topic, and what role do the innovation leaders play in these kind of conversations in potentially shifting more dollars towards R&D and making these companies and businesses more productive and more resilient?
Well, I hate to answer it this way, but I mean that's really a question more for a CFO and somebody in the finance organization, somebody in technology. I mean, every company has its own financial strategies that it deploys for various reasons, and I would have to defer that into our finance and our finance team as to why we do what we do. What I can say is that we continue to spend in R&D. We're not, you know, we have a long history of spending and investing in R&D independent of what's going on. That is certainly not slowing down. That's keeping up. With our move to 6 business units a year ago, the business units are focusing more and more of their R&D dollars. And actually I see more of a willingness to try things. Now, things are smaller in what they're trialing, but they're trialing a lot more things in the innovation area. The idea is try something, learn very quickly, and expand rapidly, as opposed to let's plan this thing out for 9 months and figure out what's going to happen. So when I talk to a lot of startups, I say, as you see opportunities, think of it as land and expand. Is that get that proof of concept, get that initial piece of work trial done, make it hugely successful, because the one thing that all large corporations are good at, including P&G, is scaling. And it's better to be involved in getting 1 or 2 small things going as opposed to trying to chase that big deal, because if 1 or 2 things take hold that you have, and maybe it's out of 6 or 7 things, possibilities, the chances are 4 or 5 of those others will come along and may just come along later, but get there and first. So innovation is something that everybody should keep doing. Unfortunately, those industries that are decimated, they will cut back. And so I also advise startups to just be cautious. Don't ignore some of these decimated or these industries that are in trouble, but just be cautious. But if you help them now, and I know my friends are in CIOs in some of these companies, if you help them now, if you take a little risk with them now, they'll remember that. And when times get better, then it'll come back to you in multiples of what effort and time you're putting in now.
Alan, we've known each other for 8, 9 years now, and you've been involved for so many years with a lot of startup ecosystems. And I know you've been to Tel Aviv, so many times, and work with a lot of the people in our venture community and their portfolio. And you kind of have a really good way of translating big corporates and big enterprise to startups. And in times like this, I want to kind of hear from you what are the best way for startups to show value, first of all, right now to customers and to potential customers, and specifically, the engagement with companies. You touched on it a little bit, but in what way do you see your interaction with the startup ecosystem evolving or changing in times like this, and what would you want to see from them?
So I think the one word that I like to keep going back to is empathy. I mean, be empathetic. This isn't, I think we always have to have some empathy in what we're doing, but now's the time to show a lot more empathy. And remember, the people that you're dealing with in the large corporations are people too. They're not just a target. They're just not a buyer. They're people, and they're going through a lot of stress and strain and other things in their personal lives, just like you are and everybody else. So really take that into consideration. Be sincere, but don't overdo it. I can't tell you how many people that I don't know are sending notes and messages to me, with, I think, somewhat right intention. How are you? How is your family? Well, if you don't know my family, you don't know me. We don't want to turn this into just a politeness. It's know who you're talking to and understand the relationship. I think that the people actually have more time to spend with, whether it's startups or others. I was talking to some people in the pharmaceutical industry. Doctors are spending more time with the pharmaceutical sales reps over Zoom and over video than they were in person, because they actually have more time to spend and can have a longer, more in-depth conversation. So this, as difficult as this is, there's actually a lot of good things that are happening from a behavior standpoint. But remember who to go talk to. In a large Fortune 1000 company, Fortune 2000 companies, you don't need to be talking to the CTO. You don't need to be talking to the CIO if you're selling networking gear, you're selling security products, you're selling applications. Go figure out who the person is that's the decision maker and go talk to them. And whether you start with an email or you start by getting an introduction, networking does matter. Relationships matter. Find somebody that knows the person so that it isn't cold. That will certainly help as well. The other thing I caution people, and I mentioned this to some people the other day, is because everybody is buying email addresses, buying phone numbers and things, be awfully careful on the phone numbers that you're getting, that you don't get somebody's personal phone number. My personal phone number has somehow gotten out there, and people, it's to the point now where I feel like I'm being harassed, and I'm remembering the names of the people that are calling me on my personal number, and if they don't hang up after I politely ask them, tell them it's my personal number, they get blackballed probably for the next 3 to 5 years. I don't care what company they're with. They're gone. I'm not going to deal with it as much as I need the product or don't need the product, because you're now in my personal space. So remember, there is a fine line between business and personal. It can be bridged through networks and relationships, but don't just simply cold call on your own and do that. So really check your phone, check the phone numbers you have to understand what type of a number that it is. I am very optimistic here because I believe that there is going to be a lot of need, and I think the startups have a lot of the solutions that are going to be needed. So I'm very optimistic. The challenge is going to be navigating the relationships. If I had some extra money, or if I had money, I would make sure that my sales team or my biz dev team has a large contact list, has previous relationships with my potential target customers, as opposed to relying on somebody that's brand new in this particular domain or space to get in the door right now. Because that's who's going to get through when you're living in a virtual world, is who you know, as opposed to what somebody knows.
Yeah, and I think we talked about it a lot over the years in terms of kind of building your long-term relationship into the market. And I think the question for a lot of startups in times like this is how do I do it in situation where we're in a pandemic? How do I build these kinds of relationships? I can't just go to conferences. I can't hop on the plane and go see a customer. Are there going to be new ways for startups to engage with enterprise? As you mentioned, hiring the right people. But I think meanwhile, for many early stage startups, you know, they're looking for that first POC or first, you know, MVP being validated and tested in a world where everyone is virtual as opposed to physical.
So I think this is where it's important to have strong customer advisory board, or, you know, advisory boards. You know, you have your board of directors with your investors, but having a strong set of advisors that you can work with, that can help open some doors, that can provide some advice, that is a key. I mean, I've been an advisor to a number of different companies, and I've seen these guys IPO. I've seen them sell for hundreds of millions of dollars, you know, over time. But it's knowing when to use and how to use an advisory board is very, very important. Also, the relationship that you have with your investors is important. The investors are getting creative in how to pull the CIOs together. I can tell you, I've been invited to numerous virtual wine socials where a bottle of wine shows up at your door, and we're having discussions between the CIOs and the venture firms. That's always a nice surprise, and they bring the people from the winery on, and they tell you about what you're drinking while you're talking about things. So you can get creative with this, but I'll go back to getting a strong advisory board, you know, call it 4 to 6 people that can help you with your minimal viable product, people that can help you with the connections, people that can help be a sounding board for you, is probably the best way in this situation, I think in any situation, to grow a company right now.
Rob, do you have more questions?
I think we touched the major ones, but maybe the last one, just in sake of time. Do you see any specific interesting fintech opportunities now with this new COVID-19 situation, in how corporates can interact with smaller businesses, or how the banks are going to be disrupted in a way because of how the risk allocation of debt and lands is going to work?
So it's been a while since I've been in fintech. I spent some time at ING,
right,
many years ago. But you know, I'm a believer that you know, blockchain and cryptocurrencies is going to play an important role. I think we're getting distributed as a workforce. We're getting distributed as people. We're going to have to do something, and I think that there's going to be some opportunities there, because we're going to also have to establish a new type of trust. And I think we were headed that way, and this is just going to make that movement even faster. So I believe that we're going to see things head that direction. I believe that we're also going to see continued evolution of some of the traditional industries, insurance and others, into more of a digital world. You're already seeing many of the insurance players, not all of them, which is interesting, but many of the car insurance players, automotive, are already saying, look, we know you're not driving as much, so we're going to give you a refund right now, and put some more money in your pocket as a way to try to create loyalty. They didn't have to do this. I'm sure they went to their actuaries, and the actuaries ran the numbers and said, wait a minute, you know, we can afford to do this because claims are going to be down, therefore this will buy us some goodwill. But I'm sure we're going to see that. I think that we're going to see new models emerging as we end up with more connected, you know, telehealth gets connected more and more with insurance, which gets connected with other people. It's not only going to create new telehealth services, but it's going to create new insurance models, new payment models as well. And from a corporation standpoint, corporations may have to use their balance sheets more in order to help their smaller suppliers get through this financial crisis, depending on what happens with the banks, if the banks hold up or don't hold up. So there's going to be an awful lot evolving. There's going to be a lot of winners and a lot of losers, but I think that you're going to have a lot of people willing to try new things. especially if we start looking at the developing world. My belief is the developing world is going to be hit much harder than anywhere else. And so you're going to need new financial instruments and new things in order to help them simply try to maintain where they've been, not even to catch up in the future.
Alan, in terms of manufacturing, and I think that is something that, a lot of people are wondering because of the pandemic and how it hit, globally, do you find that the US or corporations will bring manufacturing more locally as opposed to being distributed?
It's an interesting question. I think there's a political side to that the answer there as well.
We don't want to talk politics.
And I think people are going to rethink the supply chain.
Yeah.
And I was listening to a speaker from the White House yesterday, and he was talking about the need for critical goods to be produced in the United States, not produced overseas anymore, because we don't have access to them, and we're subject to competition from other areas in order to get to them. I think everyone is going to be rethinking what the model looks like. But I think in many ways, there's been trends in manufacturing, if we want to take it to an extreme, that whether it's the Nespresso or whether it's Keurig, all of a sudden you're manufacturing coffee in your home in some ways. You're seeing the same thing where we have a product called Opti, which we launched at CES, which is coming into the US and China, where it's using AI and ML and almost like inkjet technology to be able to apply skin moisturizer right at the point of your on your skin as you're moving the device over here. So I think there's a trend to what I'll call micro manufacturing anyway, more personalized manufacturing, and this will then change the supply chain also. So lots of changes coming.
Yeah, definitely. What are you excited about in times like this? Like when, you're looking forward to seeing, technology solving a problem.
I think it's the AI and ML, the doubling down. We're very interested in digital twins and the ability to, for factories and for other uses, that's going to become very, very important. I was talking to people I know from the space industry. If you think about the space station, how they've been able to test things before they bring it up there. They can't test software, test hardware, put something up there and just hope it works. They have to test it pretty thoroughly, because you can't fix it once it gets up into orbit. So I think there's some inspiration to be had from these closed loop systems that NASA and ESA and others have worked on for years. So I think digital twins is going to be very important. 5G and what that's going to do to help impact latency and the new types of capabilities that's going to bring. I was talking to a large telecom company in Japan right before the pandemic hit, and they are investing a lot of money. They're trying to figure out what type of content, where is it going to start? Is it going to start with entertainment and things? But that then brings into question advertising. What role is advertising going to play once you get into a 5G world, and now you're more mobile again? So I like anything to do with the edge. I like anything that's going to be defeating latency, anything that's going to be predictive in nature and very quantitative. This is what I personally like to see going on. But there still is an opportunity for a lot of the foundational work that needs to be done. Networks are going to have to be rebuilt. You can't take a flat network which is architected 15, 20 years ago and expect that you're going to secure it or have the performance that you need going forward. And corporations have not invested in network technology for years. I think that we're going to see some changes in the applications. More and more applications are going to be built. We're not going to see as many of these large integrated suites anymore. They'll provide a role for some processes, but a lot of these things will be pushed out more towards just the edge or for specific uses. And I think we're going to see a resurgence of an abstraction strategies, which has been there lately with APIs and things of that nature. but even the API gateways tend to be centralized. Now we need to move more into a distributed and mesh type of approach for interactions with based on open standards. So a lot of change is coming, and it's just quite an exciting time to be in tech.
Definitely. And I hope you get to, continue your global expansions as well, and looking into technologies outside the US. I know you've been looking everywhere. We met I think in Tel Aviv last time. Yeah. We saw each other. So are you still looking outside and talking to companies in other parts of the globe?
No, I certainly am. I've spent a lot of time in Tel Aviv over the years, as you know, and Tel Aviv, and essentially Tel Aviv, Israel, is just a hotbed of technology, of course. We're seeing other areas grow. What's happened is the investors or risk capital is now moving into different parts of the world. And although the ecosystems are not as large as, say, Israel or Beijing or certainly Silicon Valley or elsewhere, we're seeing investors looking elsewhere and starting to place bets, which is a good sign. There used to be a predominant amount, a large amount of the money, dominant amount of money used to be invested right in Silicon Valley, although it still is a very large amount of the money here. It is spreading out. There's over 1,000 corporate venture firms now, if you may, based on strategic investments for corporations that have come about. So things have democratized quite a bit. Good ideas come from anywhere and everywhere in the world. It's just the opportunities of where you can test. Some areas have better labor laws or more favorable labor laws for startups than others. But you have to be everywhere. You can't, so you need to cover about 80% of the world, and hopefully the other 20% you'll somehow stumble across at some point in time.
Right.
What are some of the strengths or interesting things you've seen about the nature of startups in Israel in comparison with startups here in the Valley?
Well, having spent a lot of time going back, I don't know, I guess 7, 8, 9 years now, the two areas are very similar in many ways. The degrees of separation in Israel are a lot fewer than the degrees of separation here in the Valley, although it's very tight. There's a close tie between Israel and the Valley. I think there's 50 or 60,000 Israelis living in Northern California now, so that makes for a nice tie. Yeah. And why United and El Al decided to start flights, I think, nonstop. But I think that there's the spirit. I think that in Israel there's more of a willingness to try new things and to make entrepreneurialism really a discipline. And when I say that, it's people really want to study and go to the next one. It's about inventing things new. I've seen some changes over the last 8 years where people are wanting to grow, Israelis are wanting to grow companies more, as opposed to getting it to a point and selling out earlier. They're tending to want to actually grow a business and create larger businesses, which is very good for everybody. Right. And I think that some of the unique training and opportunities because of Israeli society and the training that people get by being associated, coming through the military, gives you a lot of opportunities at younger ages to take on more responsibility, think differently, try to resolve problems in new and fascinating ways. And it's great. Where I think the area of opportunity is that many things that have been created in Israel have been created for one purpose. And there's actually opportunities to repurpose that technology or those things to other areas. An example is there's a lot of great technology that's been developed for clinical purposes. This day and age, a lot of this technology that's been developed for clinical purposes could be repurposed to consumers. And if there were very strong interfaces and intuitive ways of doing things for a consumer, and it could become assisted. But I don't see the entrepreneurs moving in that direction. I see them staying with what they're comfortable with in the clinician areas. So I think that the opportunity is to teach to pivot, look for the opportunities. I still believe that there's some more opportunities on the front end that could be further developed. And if it can't be, if it can't be developed locally, maybe that's where a partnership has to occur between the various groups in different parts of the world to bring it together. And certainly Zoom and WebEx and these other technologies have now proven we don't all have to be in the same place to be working on things simultaneously.
Yeah, definitely. Yep. We've been seeing that as well. Alan, I think we're out of time, but I just wanted to again thank you for doing this. I think that you know, we've answered some of the kind of pressing topics that some of the founders emailed us prior to the session, and we wanted to answer their questions both about the various opportunities that you see from your vantage point, as well as things that you think, you know, will not going to be as interesting. I think as everyone is trying to kind of rethink and reassess their go-to-market and how they're going to do it, it's really key to have people and leaders like you offering this insight. So I really appreciate it. Thank you, Rob, for joining me in doing this as well and asking some key questions. And thank you, Google for Startups. We're looking forward for our next sessions in the coming weeks. And thank you, and see you soon.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks.
Have a good day. Have a good evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.